Okay, you got her muted.
Okay.
Or
All right.
she,
Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session. Super excited for this. It's called From Red to Blue to All the Colors of the Rainbow, how we can support our LGBTQ plus education community. As I was saying, my name is Takeru Nagayoshi. I also go by TK, the 2020 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year. I was a high school English and research teacher, but recently I transferred out of the classroom, taking a little break right now. And I work currently for Panorama Education, focusing on SEL content. He, him pronouns, I identify as gay, an Asian American, right? My parents are Japanese. I'm in their attic right now. And the state that I'm representing today is the blue state of Massachusetts. So Jed, throwing it over to you.
My name is Jed Dearybury. Dairy like a cow, berry like a fruit. It's not spelled that way though, but that's helping you remember how to say it. I was a finalist for South Carolina Teacher of the Year in 2015. I taught first and second grade for 13 years before transferring full-time professional development and higher ed, where I trained future teachers in the pre-service programs for the University of South Carolina. And really any institute that'll have me as an adjunct, I'll jump on and teach. And I'm representing the red state of South Carolina today, and I'm coming to you live from my home office, full of
I
all
love
kind
that.
of wonderfulness here. And we are so excited to be with you and talk about this topic. And Takeru, if I may just take one moment to say, this is the first official LGBTQ education presentation I've ever been a part of. I was on a panel one time, but it just didn't feel like this. And I'm just super excited to be a part of this and want to give a special thanks to Instoy for giving us this platform to talk about helping and supporting our LGBTQ educator community.
For sure. And it's been so great getting to know you. And I'm
Class.
glad that I get to be in your first LGBTQ plus related.
Woo-hoo!
But
I forgot to say my pronouns, he, him, and I identify as a gay white boy from the South, if you didn't notice my accent.
there you go. Folks, if you also wanted to introduce yourselves, let us know in the chat. And as folks are doing that, I just wanted to share a couple of our objectives of what we wanted to do. We wanted to give like a general state of the queer community, the queer education community from a national and statewide perspective, and reflect on whether our own respective states that we're in, right, where we are in terms of that progress. And hopefully, right, as we're talking, as we're having these conversations, we wanted to make it sort of like a fireside chat between me and Jed, who represent these two different states. We can talk about and have folks identify specific mindsets, actions that might help support your LGBTQ plus education community, your colleagues, your students, right, your school at large. And so that is what we want to go over in a nutshell. But why don't we start off by talking a little bit about, well, where is the state of the education community in 2021? And so, Jed, I'm going to have you start with this first slide over here, if it goes on. There we go. Oh, just kidding.
Well, I'm worried that I froze up. Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, it's a little slow on my end too. And so I do apologize if things are a bit laggy, folks.
Yeah, it felt like it lagged there for a minute, and I felt like I froze up on the screen. So anyway, as we are jumping in here, we thought it was important to talk about the LGBTQ plus specifically, because a lot of people may not understand what those letters stand for. So we're just going to walk you through it briefly. L is for lesbian, G is for gay, B is for bisexual, T is for transgender, Q is for queer, and also questioning. I think it's important to acknowledge that. And then the plus, we left it blank, even though there's some specific intersex and asexual that there, but I think the plus encompasses what I see as a spectrum of sexuality. I think that many people think that it has to be either or, and there's this whole beautiful rainbow, if you will, of a spectrum that people who identify as LGBTQ, and even though you might identify as straight, you might be somewhere on the spectrum and not even realize it. And so that's what education and informing and advocacy, all of that helps to all of us to be more educated on the topic.
Yeah, for sure. And then the next slide, if folks can see, is, or it should be, right, a picture of a gender unicorn. It went back to my previous slide I'm seeing on my end. Sorry, things are really slow on my computer. And so not as great as I want it for me. But the gender unicorn is a really great concept that helped me at least understand the difference between sexual orientation, the sex that you're assigned at birth, the gender identity that you have, and how you express yourself, right? Oftentimes these concepts kind of get mixed and mashed together, and some folks get confused as to why a person might be a trans male, but then identify as straight. And I think this framework, right, more or less, not only speaks to this concept of a spectrum, right, that Jed was talking about, but helps break up these different related terms so that folks can have a clear understanding of what our students mean, what our colleagues mean, what we ourselves mean when we talk about our gender and our sexual orientation. And so just one quick example, in my case, I was assigned male at birth, right? I am in terms of gender identity, also identify as a man. I use he, him pronouns. My gender expression is a little bit more fluid. I want to say I'm maybe a little bit in the middle of the masculine, feminine category, right? And then I am physically attracted to, right? And also emotionally attracted to men. And so that is how I would describe myself using this framework. And so for those of you who might be interested, we are going to be sharing this slide, but it's a really wonderful tool to help you conceptualize, and maybe in some cases your students and colleagues to conceptualize some of these terms. And so we just wanted to throw that out there.
And I just want to add really quickly, this particular graphic poster, if you will, it's also good to use with your own family and friends. And I know when I showed my mom this, it helped her understand so much more of all the different terms and all the different, labels. So don't be afraid to use that in your own personal life too, to educate the folks around you.
For sure. All right. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was just kind of the general context of where the LGBTQ community is at right now. I'm going to try to go next to my slide. Hopefully it works. There we go. We are not in a good place. So kind of a harsh transition there. If you look at the recent history of LGBTQ rights in the United States, 2021 is one of those bad years. And there have been an unprecedented numbers of anti-queer legislation bills that are in our Congress spaces, our state houses, and they directly impact our line of work as educators, right? Be they proposals that target trans youth, restricting their access to school restrooms or sports, or criminalizing healthcare for trans teens and children, or things that actually forbid educators to discuss the existence of LGBTQ plus people or sexuality and gender, right? And that ranges from things in sex ed to literature and history. There are a lot of bills that are out there that are trying to target LGBTQ plus people today. And it's really scary. And it's really startling, at least personally, for someone like me who came of age in a world that I thought was more empathetic to queer people. And yet we're seeing and we're witnessing this cultural backlash. And so I thought it was important that we name, right, that reality.
We wanted to show you on the next slide some of our statistics that we found through some research in national organizations. This is from the GLSEN organization. Some of the statistics I don't think will surprise you, but some of them will. You see at the beginning, 98% of LGBTQ students heard the term gay used in a negative way, with 75% of those reporting it frequently. I will be honest with you, that didn't surprise me as a statistic, because it is a lived experience. I see that on a daily basis. I hear from students, I hear from teachers. I was not surprised that number was that high. That's why this session is so needed, so we can bring awareness to what's happening to our community. If you look at the next one, it goes a step further than just negative away. Or go back to that previous slide. I was going to the next statistic there. It's okay. 59% of the LGBTQ plus students feel unsafe at school because of their sexual or gender identification. Okay, so that's more than just a negative comment. They feel unsafe. And we know that when students feel unsafe, that it hampers their ability to learn. They're not going to be able to learn at the school. if you look at the next half of that slide, it says 13% of the students reported that school staff took action. Only 13% of the school took action, and 67% reported that they heard the negative comments from staff about their sexuality or gender. 67% of that 98% heard it from staff. When I think about that, it's just unconscionable to me that the students are being chastised, harassed, bullied, made fun of, felt unsafe by their educational leaders. The caretakers who were supposed to be there to protect them from that are actually participating in it. In the next slide, we jumped over to the Trevor Project and the National Survey on LGBTQ mental health. This was outside of the school system. This was just in general of the world. But it says here that 42% of LGBTQ youth have considered attempting suicide, including half of trans and non-binary students. So, and I'll just tell you this, I'm 43 years old. I grew up I was born in 1978. I grew up in the 90s as a teenager. And there was more than one time that I thought about ending my life because of my sexuality. I grew up in a very red state, conservative, church family. It was frowned upon socially. It was frowned upon spiritually. It was frowned upon at school, at home, everywhere I went. And the only way I thought it would ever get better is if I took my own life. And so when I see that statistic, and it grieves me that we're still at that point where almost half have said that they wanted to end their life because of their existence. And that's tough to read. But again, it's a lived experience for me. And if you look at the next one, it says 59% of LGBTQ youth wanted to receive mental health counseling, but were unable to receive it. Guess who they would see every day that could provide them with a little mental health boost? It's us educators, right? And so that's why this session is so important for us to know these stats, but also to know the need of our work with not only our students, but there's some coworkers in your building who are afraid to come out, who haven't come out fully because of what they fear as a reprisal professionally. So they need our help as well. TK, if you want to jump in and start us on the section, or do you have anything to add there?
No, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for naming us of the importance of this work and the sobering realities of where we're at. There's this conception that we got gay marriage, it's done, the struggle's over, right? And it's not true, right? And what we're going to be doing is we're going to reflect on the queer LGBTQ plus education community experiences from a statewide perspective, right? Because the reality is that every region has its differences in values, and with those regional differences, also implication differences in how homophobia, how transphobia tends to manifest, and what strategies actually work best to combat them, right? In other words, there's no one size fits all. How it's like in South Carolina in the 90s is very different from how it's like in Massachusetts in the 2010s, right? By the way, I'm looking at the chat. There are a lot of folks from different places. If you can let us know, for those of you who haven't, which state you're representing. And then for those of you who already let us know what your states are, whether you feel like your state is considered more red, more blue, right? Maybe purple or in between. If you want to use other terms like conservative and liberal, feel free to let us know. But I'm just kind of curious what the landscape might look like with the folks who are currently in the space. And I want us to keep those ideas in mind as we're going to be kind of talking about and sharing our experiences. And so how we're going to do that is by a Q&A, fireside chat model and style. So Jed, I think you have the first question that you're going to be asking me, and then we're going to kind of ping pong back and forth.
Yeah,
right?
So the first question says to tell us how it was like being an LGBTQ plus educator when you were out. How did students, colleagues, and the community respond?
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I want to say the decision to come out in the classroom is a deeply personal one, right? There's no right or wrong answer. And I think every educator should take stock of the political and social dynamics of their school community and come out if and only if they feel ready, they feel supported, right? And most importantly, they feel safe, right? And so for me, the choice to come out was towards the end of my first year of teaching. And that was important because I already had established a strong class culture. And it was actually in response to the Pulse shooting, the mass shooting that killed dozens of LGBTQ plus people in a gay nightclub in Miami. And prior to Pulse, even I was feeling really confined. I had this assumption that teachers ought to keep their personal and professional lives separate, and that there's like no way for teachers to be talking about their private life. And how suffocating was that, right? Because it meant that I couldn't talk about my partner. I couldn't express my true self and feel authentic and liberated in the way that I wanted my students to be. And especially once the Pulse shooting happened, I was like visibly emotionally shaken, right? And I wasn't okay. And at that moment, it was so important for me to center my truth and to tell my students, especially for a lot of my gay, lesbian, bi, trans, queer students, that it's okay to be queer, right? It's scary to be openly queer even today, but it does get better, right? And I wanted to kind of be that adult that I never had growing up. I never had an out educator. But Jed, you know what's really crazy though?
Yeah.
I was always afraid of coming out in the classroom because I felt that would alienate my hyper masculine straight boys. Like, we went to high school, we know how homophobic, right? Guys can sometimes be. But oddly enough, the biggest takeaway that I had from coming out, I had this whole mini lesson about homophobia, transphobia. I was emotional right after the Pulse shooting. Oddly enough, it really resonated with a lot of my straight identified male students. And so for instance, there was this kid named, we'll call him Brian, right? I'm still in contact with him to this day. And he was this really tall kid. He had the sleeve tattoo all over. And after I came out, he actually started chatting me up after class to process his emotions, the things that he was going through, the pregnancy scare that he had with his girlfriend, this confrontation that he had with an officer, the hurt, right, that he was feeling because of his father being incarcerated. And I think what he appreciated was that, there was a safe space and a person with whom he could confide in and be vulnerable with. There's this another student, his name is Noah. And I remember when I was, coming out, he was in the back of the classroom with like a stone cold face with his arms crossed. The whole time I had no idea what he was thinking. But he became one of those students who would like stay behind class and chat with me every once in a while until the day he graduated. And in a lot of our conversations, I learned a lot about his own life and how he was a survivor of domestic violence. And we'd have conversations about what it means to be a different man from his father. And, I won't forget the moment that he broke down in tears in my class, and it was just us two, because his mom found herself in another abusive relationship and he didn't really know what to do. And I can't say that I, helped resolve all his struggles, right? But I know that by being able to listen, being an emphatic and warm presence, I gave him the support that he needed at that time. And so, in other words, like for these young men, right, it mattered less who I loved and more that I could explore with them what it means to be a man in a world where there's so much pressure, so much toxic pressure and expectations on boyhood, on maleness, right, with very little direction. And so to me, I like to share that story because it's part of, I think, the added value of having an LGBTQ plus educator. I call it the queer eye effect. We just make everything fabulous. But on a more serious note, like being out allowed me to authentically lead and model things that are often deemed too unimportant to teach our young men, right? Being empathetic, listening without judgment, giving them the tools to recognize their emotions and control them, to process their masculinity in a non-toxic way. And so that's kind of what my experience was like, in Massachusetts. What about you?
So first of all, I just want to say this, that being out or coming out, if you will, it's a daily experience for an LGBTQ person. Whether we're at work, we're at a bar, we're hanging out with new friends, we have to come out over and over again. It's why I started wearing this button and this bracelet. I kind of want it to be like this, maybe this doesn't definitely signify that I'm a gay man, but it definitely gets people asking questions. Just last night, I was at my high school had homecoming football game. My niece was up for homecoming queen, so I went to the ball game, went to talk to an old friend of mine who was there near the band, and I heard some of the high school students saying, "Hey, that guy's wearing a rainbow. Is he gay?" I could hear them, so it's like my beacon, if you will. So I had this little moment where I was coming out to those kids, whether I meant to or not, you know? So it's a constant thing down here. I did not ever come out in my elementary classroom. I was always very afraid to do that because, um, as I've said, I live in a very conservative area. There are lots of negative stereotypes about men in education, specifically in early childhood. And I didn't want those put on me. I didn't want to fight that battle. But around the year 2013, I did start to come out professionally. I started becoming involved in advocacy work. I was on the board for an LGBTQ center here in town for a little while. Over the last few years, I became very vocal on social media, and I got a lot of pushback for that, Takeru. It was a rough time, specifically the summer of 2018. Yeah, put those slides. These are just two of thousands that I got on Twitter, and I left their names on there. Please don't waste your time looking these people up. They're trash. But you can see the sweet messages that they sent me. These were public tweets. This was not in my inbox. But that's the kind of world that we live in. I will tell you, there was I received death threats in my inbox. That there was actually some police investigation. They found a guy who lived in his mom's basement in Indiana, who was sending me death threats on email because they thought that I was corrupting young minds. And I never came out in my elementary classroom because this is exactly what I was afraid of. Now, as a college professor, I'm very out. I'm very open. I'm very inclusive in my work. I bring in lots of different literature, lots of different speakers of all across, not just the sexuality spectrum, but the race spectrum, the religious spectrum. And for down here where I'm at, that's very, it's scary because you never know who's in the classroom, whose mayor's daughter might be in my class that wants to push back and cause trouble. There's very much a good old boy system in place here. I'll be honest with you, knowing that this is being recorded, knowing that this is going to be out there in the world, it makes me nervous because there is lots of systems in place here in South Carolina that can cause trouble for me. I have been fired from a place for being gay. It is not an easy task to be an open person here. But as I read these tweets, I think back to what Reverend Dr. Barber was talking about. He was like, nobody bothers you if they don't think you have any power. Mm-hmm. You know, they don't bother you. So the tweets and the things that came, they thought they gave me power. As hard as they were to read, and as terrified as I was, when they even started mailing packages to my house to intimidate me, it still made me want to speak out. You know, I had made up my mind. If I was walking down the street and some person took me out because of it, then I knew that I was being taken out for standing up for equality for all. You see my shirt that I wear here. I also have an equal sign tattoo on my thigh. I didn't just come out in 2013. I came roaring out. I had years of oppression that I just needed to let out. And so here we are, and we're talking about it. And it's still shocking to me that I'm talking about it publicly. So, but anyway, that's my coming out story, if you will. That's what it's like to be out in the South. It's very terrifying, but it's also very liberating at the same time.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And it saddens me to hear that was your experience and that there are educators even today, right, who are going through that. And let's just refresh the screen so we don't have to see this grossness. And speaking of you being visibly out, by the way, I love your background, right? It's so amazing. I am just in my parents' attic, and so I feel like you are representing for sure.
Yeah, some of this is my own artwork. Some of this is student artwork. This was gifted to me by a trans student who was transitioning from, they were identified as female at birth, but were transitioning to male. And he said this giraffe was too girly for his new room. So he gave it to me. And I leave it up on my wall as just to think about him and remember him. So yeah.
I think our queer students are the most artistic. You know, maybe I'm a little biased, but I always say it's because we weren't given the paint, the colors of the tool to paint with, so we created our own. Right?
Yeah, I love that. I got chills.
Anyway, yeah, please do. So the question that we have up here is you'll start us off, but I'm wondering, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit already, but what are some challenges that you think that are still pertinent, right, to the LGBTQ plus education community in your state?
There's so many in South Carolina, as many other states. Well, I don't know many. I think it's less than it used to be. There's no hate crime bill here. So if parents or other teachers want to bully us and harass us for being gay, they're perfectly allowed to do that. I've lobbied my legislators, and they say, oh, well, that's just called assault or battery or whatever. And we have laws for that. And you don't need a special one because you're gay. Even though the statistics show that in South Carolina, the LGBTQ community is bullied tremendously. In education specifically, our school boards are loaded with super conservative agenda folks who don't want us anywhere in the system. There's a school district in the lower part of their state that told a lesbian librarian that she was not allowed to have any photos of her and her wife in the library. They didn't tell the straight teachers to take their spouses' pictures out of the classroom. And she had to do it or she was going to be fired. And because South Carolina is a right to work state, there's nothing she could do about it. There's nothing she could do about it. We don't have unions in South Carolina, so there was no support for her. There was no law that kept them from doing it. In another community, another district here in South Carolina, there was a school was leading doing the Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leadership. They added an 8th one and said that faith in Jesus Christ would be their focus for the year. And a lesbian teacher in that district was called in by a school board member, and she was told that she needed to be saved so she wouldn't be a lesbian anymore. And they didn't want her working in the district, and they would find a way to get rid of her. There's another district in the state where a teacher was regularly called a fag by one of his students. The district would not punish him because they said that was his freedom of speech. And these are things that happen in South Carolina. And the reason you don't hear about these things nationally is because the LGBTQ community here is terrified. We are terrified of speaking out. The reason that I speak out and don't feel like a professional reprisal as much is because I don't work for a district now. I work mostly for a university system, which is very open and accepting. Just a few days ago, I got a message that said Happy National Coming Out Day from the president of the university, which was amazing. So there are little glimmers of hope, but in the public school system, it is terrifying because you could lose your entire career just like that.
Wow. Yeah, it really puts things into perspective. And I think someone from like a blue state, there's so much right privilege, I think, that's inherent in what we take for granted. Massachusetts, I think like a lot of blue liberal states aren't perfect when it comes to queer rights. In fact, I think sometimes the narrative for us is that because people think we're so progressive, there isn't this sense of urgency when it actually comes to addressing LGBTQ plus issues. And so whereas the battle, right, in more red states are like what you said, combating discriminatory practices, like active bigotry, I would feel like the theme in blue states is more about combating complacency, right? And what it means to go beyond this superficial cosmetic progress. So for instance, by and large, I feel LGBTQ plus inclusion and representation isn't bad. It's not considered problematic for many of our schools to have out educators. There's a near universal use of pronouns and rainbow flags, even queer inclusive curricula. Again, not all schools, right? I want to make that clear, but I think more so than you might see in red states. But those are relatively smaller examples of progress, right? Because, not to say that they're not meaningful, they are, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that they're not systemic and infrastructural, right? And so when it comes to support for homeless LGBTQ use, the existence of mental and emotional health services that directly address queer youth needs, right? There's a lot to go. My high school didn't have, it was a school of 2,000 students, didn't have gender neutral bathrooms. Even our single stalled faculty bathrooms were gendered. So again, I still think even in places like Massachusetts, it's rare to see these large systemic changes. for me, when I think of LGBTQ plus advocacy in the state of Massachusetts, it's like those two competing narratives that I was mentioning, this like privilege of recognizing that our community does have it better than a lot of places in the country and in the world, sure. And one of just not settling for where things are, because where things are still has a long, long way to go. And so I would frame the battle as going beyond the battle of like tolerance and inclusion to the battle of like empowerment, right? And by the way, for those of you who are interested in LGBTQ plus curricula, I have an image for this. There's this wonderful Massachusetts-based organization. It's called History Unerased. That's kind of based on this principle that I was just talking about. I'll make sure that I drop the link in the chat. And their idea is that like when you hear about LGBTQ plus curricula, for instance, in K-12 schools, they're usually framed around anti-bullying, tolerance, like how can we make people feel safe, right? And that's super important, but kind of what's lost in that overemphasis is this entire historical academic framework through which we can understand the contributions that queer people have made in this world, right? And so to me, like that's a huge example of moving from tolerance and inclusion to a space of empowerment, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up because, you know, when we talk about the red versus blue, red states we're behind where you blue folks are. And I will tell you the LGBTQ history is so far behind where I'm at, even professionally. I'm still in very much the advocacy for safety mindset, and I need to be getting more into the understanding the history of my community better. But it just hasn't been something that I've been able to do. I mean, I've got lots of books I've been reading and getting better. But I'm glad to see bring that up, and I'm gonna definitely be looking at the link that you shared. We don't. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I also just wanted to quickly say that there is something that I am scared about. It's the fears of this right-wing pushback against equity and inclusion measures that's happening all across the country, right? There's this increasing well-organized culture war effort that's taking place in our education landscape. It started with the CRT boogeyman and a targeted misinformation campaign against communities to make them think that their children are being brainwashed to hate America and their own race. And naturally, that discourse is making its way to LGBTQ plus issues. Plus one, audience members, if you've seen or heard about this reactionary pushback. And as I mentioned, I'm in New Jersey right now. I was raised in New Jersey public schools, actually. And even though New Jersey was one of the first and few states to have LGBTQ plus inclusive curricula as a mandate, right? We're a blue state. They are experiencing a lot of pushback by this reactionary wing who think that gender and sexuality are abusive to discuss in an academic context. And so if we're not vigilant, right, even in blue states, we fall into complacency and what we take for granted can like dissipate in the blink of an eye.
And I think, again, going back to what Dr. Barber said, they're loud, but we're going to have to be louder.
Yeah.
And I think that there's more of us than there are them. They're just the ones that we're hearing right now. So the rest of us have to be just as loud. That's what this is about, is recognizing the need for advocacy and our voices as teacher leaders. I think teachers have been so silent in my state. We've been silent for far too long, and it's because we're afraid. And so I think we all have to come together to raise our voice. I'm looking at our time, Takeru. We are going to cut off here right at 2 o'clock. We're going to cut off here right at 2 o'clock sharp. So we don't want it to feel like our chat was just negative. We want to talk about some victories very quickly. Takeru, yes. Tell us a victory that the LGBTQ community has experienced in your region. And I've got one that's super exciting. And then we're going to wrap this thing up.
Okay. And likewise, folks, if you have any awesome victories that are, happening in your state and your communities, let us know in the chat. We want to end on an optimistic note. I think of victory in terms of like legislative victories. And by that lens, by and large, Massachusetts does a really good job. I'm going to drop a link from the Human Rights Campaign, and it's called the State Equity Index. And they give a state-by-state report on the laws, the policies that are impacting LGBT people. And, you know, Massachusetts, we do a really good job on employment protections, trans healthcare, anti-conversion therapy, school bullying, right? Gender marker updates on IDs, all of the things that directly impact our LGBTQ plus education community. So I'm super, super proud of that. One last thing, I'm super proud of our State House Education Committee, which is receptive to bills that support LGBTQ people. I mentioned earlier that Massachusetts, there's this narrative of like complacency. And true to that nature, we're actually one of the few so-called progressive states that doesn't have an LGBTQ inclusive curricular mandate. But one is on the docket. Nothing crazy, nothing radical. It merely just says our standards should include the sufficient instruction of the histories, roles, contributions of LGBTQ plus people. But it's a bill that I testified on with a group of queer educators across the Commonwealth. So I'm hopeful it will pass, fingers crossed.
That is so fantastic. I love it. And I can't wait for that to trickle down all the way to me here in South Carolina. But right now, I have to celebrate just the tiniest of victories. In South Carolina, there are this many handful of schools that have GSAs, Gay Straight Alliance. School boards push back on them. Principals don't want them. No, I mean, it's horrible that nobody would want this. Well, in the neighboring county next to me, Greenville County, Berea High School has started their very first Gay Straight Alliance. They have a really cool Instagram that I followed, and I've been fangirling over it because they started this. And they invited me to come be a speaker in a few weeks, and we're still trying to get the date. I cannot wait. I cannot fathom that I'm going into a public high school in South Carolina to speak to a Gay Straight Alliance. Like, I'm so excited about it. I dropped a link if anybody's interested. If you see it's the www.aaclu.org link, how to start your own Gay Straight Alliance. Don't be afraid to push for this in your school. It is needed. It is absolutely warranted. And you have a right to have one. Guess what? Every school has like Future Farmers of America. You've got your Fellowship of Christian Athletes. You got all these clubs. Gay people, we need a club, right? Especially one that aligns us with the straight folks and empowers us. Takeru.
Yeah,
we're gonna make it through this. We
did it. We got like 5 minutes, and you know,
we got like 5 minutes left. I mean, what happened here?
Our last 5 minutes was to talk about our resources to share. I'm actually going to drop the link for this slide deck in the chat after I stop my share screen, but just to give you a context of some of the things that we wanted to share. And I know the images aren't loading up here.
I have I'm sorry.
Yes, talk about those books first. Yeah.
I didn't mean to speak over you, but I've got really quickly, children's literature. I've taught children's literature for years. And I shared this in some resource. I don't know where you're going to get it, but I want to talk about them really quickly. This is one of my favorite books called Uncle Bobby's Wedding. It's about Bobby and his husband, Jamie, get married. And what I love about this is it's not two white guys. It's a white guy and a person of color getting married. That's a fantastic one. This one's called Granddad's Camper. It's about senior citizen LGBTQ folks, and it is adorable. Get it. This one is called Julian's a Mermaid. This is fantastic. This is about a grandma who helps her grandson transform into a mermaid. And a lot of people don't like this book. This was actually banned by that district in Pennsylvania a few weeks ago. Look it up. Morris Micklewhite and the Tangerine Dress. Fantastic book. And Worm Loves Worm. This one's fantastic. Y'all, I could talk about children's literature all day long. Just Google LGBTQ children's books, and there's a bazillion of them out there. And they talk about lessons and topics that sometimes you don't know how to bring up, but the book opens the door. So get some of these and start conversations with people all around you.
I love it. I love it. Super amazing. And thank you so much, Jen, for dropping the link of our slides. Feel free to use our slides. It includes everything from the gender unicorn to many of the statistics that we shared with you. And by the way, you know, you shared with us your children's book, but Jed is also an author. He has written The Courageous Classroom. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And as he's getting it, I just wanted to say that in the resource link, I also included 2 op-eds that I've written, one for The Advocate, where I elaborate on my own story of coming out in the classroom and the folks that I helped, and another in The Nation that talks about how we have to let our kids, our LGBTQ plus kids, lead this discourse. But I hope I bought enough time for you, Jed. Talk about your book real quick.
So I wrote this book. I've written 2. This one's called The Playful Classroom. It was written by me and Dr. Julie Jones. But this one is called The Courageous Classroom, and it's more on topic for this session. I'll just read you the back cover. It says, you'll learn about the impact that racism, homophobia, microaggressions, and trauma are having on the learning environment and how to create a landscape of calm to combat these negative influences. I wrote this with a fantastic psychiatrist named Dr. Janet Taylor. You may have seen her on the Good Morning America. She's, you know how when they have those little stories that they need an expert to come in and talk about? Dr. Janet is one that does that. And I got to write this book with her. She's amazing. This book, think of it like teacher laying on a couch in a therapy office, talking about our own trauma, talking about our students' trauma, and how that is affecting our teaching and their learning. And she gives us some really good practical information and tips. And I think everybody needs to read this. It's a fantastic read. It's on sale right now on Amazon. I mean, I'm not promoting Amazon. I would rather you order it from me, but if you need a discounted price, it's there. If you want to order it from me, just shoot me a message on Twitter and I'll send you my own personal link. But we would love that. I didn't mean to talk about that in our session, but thanks for letting me do that.
Of course. And Jed, please send me that link. I would love to have one. And it has been so wonderful sharing this time with you. I know we're kind of wrapping things up really quickly, but it was great connecting with Jed and hearing about different experiences. And thank you, audience members, right, for bringing your full self and your love and authenticity. Think about the students who are in your class, right? Maybe you remember them, being out, or maybe you'll never know, right? Think about the students who are currently in your class, right? Maybe they have a different story or a name from the students that you had in the past, and think about the students who are also going to be in your class in the future. Your colleagues, right? Members in your community. There are a lot of queer people, and regardless of what our regions are, we're all in this together. And so I hope that you've gotten something out of it. It was just super wonderful.
We're all in this together.
Do you want to have the final word? Just one last minute.
I just felt like I wanted to sing that. I mean, this was a celebration of LGBTQ people, and if we can finish with that song, that'd be fantastic. I couldn't find that, so I will tell you, I dropped the link to order books from me directly in the chat. That link is for both books, but if you just want one, just tell me in the little box, and I will get you just one, and we'll do that.
Promo code and stoy. Yeah, you just heard it here. Anyway, happy Saturday, and please take care of yourselves. Bye.
See you. Bye.